Good evening, everybody. Tonight, as promised, we are going to be having a conversation with Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller on the oceans economy, or the blue economy as it's known. And with that, I would just like to actually invite Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller to actually just say hi to everybody, and then yes, we can, yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's very good to be on Karabo's show, Tech Talk, tonight. And I'm looking forward to sharing some ideas with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Prof, I think a lot of people have had me talk about or have had us talk about what we call the oceans economy. What exactly is the oceans economy or the blue economy? Yes.
Okay, so I'm glad you said the blue economy because I prefer to refer to it as the blue economy. So it's related to oceans, it's related to jobs, and it's related to economic growth, but it's also related to sustainability. So we have these wonderful things called oceans. Most of the world is covered by them, and they hold a lot of potential for human growth. But at the same time, you've always got to balance that human growth with environmental sustainability and to keep the issues of climate change in mind, which is why blue's better, because blue's really the same as green, right? Mm-hmm. It's about focusing on environmental sustainability. So in 1972, going all the way back to the Club of Rome, they wrote a report. It was the year after I was born, giving away my age. They wrote a report called The Limits of Growth. And in there, they said by 2022, the Earth's population would start to become larger than what the Earth can actually hold. And this has now been applied to the way in which we speak about the exploitation of the oceans. Because there's a situation where there's overfishing, for example. There's acidification of the oceans going on, and this is extremely bad for the environment. So the emphasis for me is always around blue. So we do talk in South Africa about the opportunities that are there for exploitation and growth, economic growth in the oceans. And there are many of those.
Since this is Tech Tuesday, is there any linkages between, what is actually happening in terms of the current technology landscape and the blue economy?
Yeah, for sure. So the way I got involved with the blue economy was through the Department of Science and Innovation. So they're the department that's actually driving this to some extent within South Africa from an R&D or research and development perspective. And science, technology, and innovation are key aspects in terms of the blue economy, because there are new ways of doing things that will develop into, for example, renewable energy. That's a big one. So we work with an organization in Iran called the Center for Science and Technology Transfer, where they look at new technologies and innovation in renewable energy. So you have these really exciting developments around, for example, wave energy. So we all know about wind and solar, but we don't know much about wave energy or the way in which the ocean's energy can be used to generate sustainable and renewable energies. But that's not the only thing. I mean, there's really new ways of feeding people, new technologies around the use of seaweed and sea kelp to actually feed populations. And so it's very cutting edge, actually. And I would say it's the frontier for science and technology and innovation.
wow. We if you go to the health spas and whatever, they always tell you, you just need this seaweed wrap, or just take this powder, this kelp powder. It's gonna help you. Your skin is gonna clear up, but you don't really think of it as something that could actually be something that generates energy. In a country like ours, where we're always like anxious about the next load shedding schedule or things like that, and
Yeah.
to think that there is so much that we could actually be exploring. And earlier on, you were mentioning about sustainability.
Mm.
Is tech assisting to sustain the blue economy, or is it being part of the deterioration of our oceans, or as you said, that the blue economy is bigger than just the oceans? It's more comprehensive.
Yeah, so they're two sides of the coin, as the Chinese always say. So we have the technology and innovation around the oceans that deals with more exploitation in terms of, oil, let's say oil and gas exploration, deep sea oil and gas
Yes.
exploration. There's constantly innovation around that. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, going into the deep sea and mining is going to cause massive, massive and huge impacts on the
Mm-hmm.
ocean, and it's going to affect our lives ultimately. So there's that side of it, sort of industry, and the way in which industry wants to develop new ways of fishing, of getting oil and gas out of the ocean, of building bigger ports, bigger ships, lots of pollution going on, and so on, based on this kind of innovation, so to speak.
Yes.
But then you also have new innovations, which are looking at, as I say, renewable energy, new innovations around ocean-friendly, environmental-friendly ports, and so we need to start focusing, I think, on the side of things that are not going to cause any major damage to us in future. And because we rely on the earth, I mean, we are citizens of the earth. Most of the earth is oceans, as I said. So we need to be very careful. And this links in with the Sustainable Development Goals. So
Yes.
South Africa is very into this at the moment. We all have to be 2030s round the corner. So it's
Mm-hmm.
Sustainable Development Goals Vision 2030. We have to meet these goals in like a few years.
Mm.
And we're not nearly there. So Sustainable Development Goal 14 is all about life under the ocean. And this is linked to the other sustainability goals, as well as what I find very interesting is gender, gender economic power empowerment. So
Mm-hmm.
the empowerment of women
Yes.
in the economy, through the oceans economy, and through blue innovation, or blue justice, as it's also called.
Okay. Um, you I know you to be a very passionate about women empowerment, and I'm sitting here, and you're explaining, how even we don't have to be fighting about fracking or whatever, that there is way more in terms of the blue economy that we could be exploiting and actually benefiting from. But then what's stopping us as South Africa from actually exploiting this? Because we have, as far as I know, the highest unemployment rate in,
Mm,
and
mm.
our inequality, it's continuously going there. Why are we not exploiting this? What are the barriers to actually us exploiting this?
Well, I work for a science council, Human Sciences Research Council, and so we're very well aware of the fact that our government doesn't spend enough money on research and development, science and innovation. Countries that advance scientifically, and scientific advancement leads to job creation and job growth, spend at least 1% of their GDP on research and development, science and innovation. We spend a lot less than that. So we're not investing. The private sector invests in research and development, but government, in my view, doesn't invest enough in this. So if we're not going to be investing in this, we're not going to reap the benefits of it. to get something done, you have to make an investment in it. So that investment is financial, but it's also the investment of people, of all sorts of other resources that are necessary to make something work. And we're not taking it seriously enough. So we're never going to get to the point of a Germany or a China or an America where they spend almost 2% of their GDP on research and development. And that needs to be looked at seriously, because we're not considering it in its bigger picture, in the sense that that kind of growth can lead to dealing with issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in South Africa.
Wow. And you've just mentioned on other countries, or countries that are actually advancing, and actually have very low unemployment rate. You think of how many people are there in China. 1 billion people are in China, but they still have less unemployment rate than us. Is innovation central to the ecosystem of the blue ocean ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that we can really resolve a whole lot of our issues as a nation if we start to grow in this area and if we take it seriously. So you and I were speaking earlier about something called Operation Phakisa in South Africa. So Phakisa means big, fast results, hurry up. And one of the things that Operation Phakisa did was look at the ocean economy and what it can offer to South Africa. The only problem with this was that it's kind of slowed down. It wasn't as much of a hurry up as a slow down. It hasn't developed as far as it could have in terms of looking at what we can do to grow in the area of the blue economy. And so we need to revisit that whole thing. And included in that is research and development, science and innovation. And it can unlock a lot of opportunities, including opportunities for women. For example, artisanal and small-scale fishing. Women are at the forefront of artisanal and small-scale fishing in almost all the developing countries that have oceans. Also, tourism, local tourism is also very much focused on the coastal areas in South Africa. Yes. So, we can look at these things and see how we can grow them without too much exploitation, without too much environmental degradation. Some countries, and this is quite interesting, actually have things called a blue fund. And what they do is they employ people in rural coastal communities to conserve those coastlines by, for example, planting mangrove trees, because mangrove trees absorb carbon dioxide and then that's locked into the ocean, which is obviously much better for our environment and could help us deal with the whole climate crisis, which is also leading to poverty and unemployment. So those are the kinds of innovations that are out there that we are not thinking about, that we are not grabbing onto.
Wow. Because you've just been sharing all these potential areas of expansion, and they could actually help us as a country. But which ones would you add on to? Perhaps let me look at a country like Malaysia, which at some point was had very horrible with development. And currently, if you compare Malaysia, I think Malaysia got this independence at the same time as Ghana. And if you compare them, that development, where Ghana was actually a bit further advanced than Malaysia, but then now when you compare it, even when you compare Malaysia with us, how could you possibly, maybe what are the potential lessons that we can learn from countries like Malaysia in also inclusion to what you have just been sharing right now?
Well, I think it's really about political will and public awareness. So we need to be aware of what is possible. And I think in countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. Those are all examples of countries where development has been very successful, is around focusing on these things in a more coherent and cohesive way. So some of the countries, especially in the Indian Ocean region, have now started embedding the blue economy into government. So they have developed government departments that focus on the blue economy. They have ministries dealing with the ocean and blue economy. So they specifically focus on that and all the various potentials, such as tourism, fishing, renewable energy, and other aspects of it, such as shipbuilding. More women are getting into shipbuilding in these countries than ever before. Ports are really important for trade and industry and investment. And linked to ports is the development of roads and railroads. So that has to do with infrastructure. So if you want to develop in terms of infrastructure, you need to look at how and where to do this. And you need to be aware of what the strengths are of your country and build on those strengths. So not the same thing works for every country. So for us, for example, tourism would be a very good place to focus. Now that COVID is kind of like, I don't know if it'll ever go away, but we can live with it now. So to focus on coastal tourism, and not only Cape Town, Port Elizabeth and Durban, or Gqeberha and Durban, but the rural coastline, the beautiful Transkei area. But of course, there's controversies here, right? Because we just saw what happened with Shell, huge multinational company that was coming here wanting to explore our coastline, and that would have affected the communities that live there. So there should always be a balance between developmental growth and the sustainability of that growth in terms of the communities that depend on the land and the oceans. And you have these massive multilateral, multinational companies coming in and wanting to make money. And as a result of that, people may or may not get jobs. You never know, because multinationals normally bring their own people in, right? So they bring their own people in to do the work, and they pay their own people. And that's where the problems are. Maybe we're a bit nervous about these aspects of development because of the fact that it can lead to exploitation. But we have brilliant minds in South Africa. I mean, we have brilliant scientists. We have departments of science and innovation that's really cutting edge. And so we need to learn from other countries. And that's why your mentioning of Malaysia, and there's so many other developing countries that are doing this, is important, because we can learn good and best practices from these countries, bring them home, localize them, make them ours, and make them work for us.
Yeah, what I find funny about us South Africans is that we kind of only look at when we look at our geographical spread as a country, we only look at possibly the land aspect, and then we don't realize just how much of the ocean that belongs to that is formed part of South Africa. As we were saying earlier on, that we focus on Robben Island, but we have so many more other islands as a country, and we don't even talk about the exploration of those. I haven't heard somebody saying I'm going to, St. Andrews at the coast of South Africa. I honestly haven't heard somebody saying they're going there. And we do, and it's a beautiful, beautiful island, but we're not even exploring it. We're not even, living there. We just have, our station there. But literally, we don't even exploit it in terms of what you are now explaining, that there is far more under the ocean. And for me, I'm looking at this, and this is something that you've been saying about women empowerment and job creation, that there is a big chance of us doing the, creating jobs in the oceans, and especially for rural communities that can be
Yes.
brought into this. We already have the green fund, so which is exactly what you were saying, Enya, on that other countries have a blue fund. Could the
Yeah.
blue fund actually expand us as a country to actually then money that we get from our ports, can we actually create a blue fund and create jobs out of that?
I'm sure that it's possible. And I think we really should consider things like that. Sometimes we kind of narrow in our understanding of what growth is. We see it as almost like industrialization in the old-fashioned sense of the word. So we need to think about technological innovation in new ways. And that includes the innovation of human beings, as you mentioned, indigenous communities, coastal communities, and the people there that have a way of living with and off the oceans that we don't even know about. And we can tap into that, but we need to invest in it. And so the idea of a blue fund, I think, is a very good one. And I mean, this is also an international concept, that you can ensure that communities are remunerated, are paid for, looking after the environment, through the work that they do on the coastlines. And I mean, there's nothing better than that, right? So you pay people to look after the oceans and the environment. And so we need to be like more aware of the possibilities that there are, to do these kinds of things. Because if we're not aware of it, there's nothing that we can do. For example, I haven't really heard anything discourse in South Africa around what people are calling the Oceans Accounting Framework internationally. So that's really finding out how much money can be made, from various aspects of the ocean ecosystem, while taking into account that we can't bypass the limits of growth, although we probably have already. But so, we need to become aware of these kinds of things, and what the opportunities are and the possibilities are, including bringing more young people into the science and innovation fields. That's job creation. So job creation isn't only about getting people to work on building roads, ports, and ships. Creating jobs is also about creating more jobs for young people, especially women, to go into the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and generating those kinds of things. So the great thing about this is, so you're creating new tech savvy jobs, and that research is going to go into addressing issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So it's like almost like a cycle, that feeds itself. So you have more people getting jobs in important areas like science and technology, and then doing research to better lives. So it's not research just for the sake of research. It's not blue sky research. It's research that informs policymakers as to how to sort of grow the blue economy, for example.
You've just mentioned something. I know that you do a lot of research, and you're always, are submitting an academic paper, and on different fields, and I'm sitting and you're saying that one of the ways is to actually bring young people and women into the STEM fields.
Yeah.
Is our education system currently actually creating that linkage or an opportunity for young people and women, especially young people and women, to actually come into the STEM fields? Do we have that, that impetus to actually do that?
Not enough. I mean, we are starting to grow, in that area. So, but the way in which you start that is very young. So, often girls are told of their own limitations when they're young, and they aren't given the the landscape, the vision, to imagine themselves as scientists, as people who are looking for new vaccines, as people who are trying to find new ways of creating energy out of seaweed. So we need to sort of spark the imagination in young people and in girls in particular from school-going age. So some of the countries that you were speaking about previously, developing countries, they start teaching kids at a very young age about these kinds of things, about the opportunities available in the maritime and marine sectors. And things that we weren't told. I wasn't told about these kinds of things when I was a child. And, you know, I always thought that science, technology, and engineering were for boys. So, you know, we have to start young, and we have to spark the imagination of youngsters and get them to think out of the box about how they want to sort of live, you know, their lives. And we need to invest more in terms of tertiary education and women getting bursaries to go and study in the field of STEM. We need to ensure that schools and universities are not creating uncomfortable environments for women and girls, because we still have that. I mean, we talk about the fact that we have equality, but we still have inequality in the workplace. So that's why a lot of women won't go into these kinds of blue jobs, for example. So women don't want to work on ships because it's very uncomfortable for them to do that. For a number of reasons. It's really a masculine environment. It's like women going into mining, right? There are very few women in mining. There are very few women in leadership positions in mining. Now, the same is with many of these blue jobs, so to speak, is that they're traditionally masculine environments where women don't necessarily feel that they would fit or they would feel comfortable. So we need to look at empowering women so that they can go into these kinds of areas and they can succeed. And that's very, very important in terms of the blue economy, because there is this perception that it's a man's domain. Sure, so tourism and fishing, you can still see women going into those areas. But when it comes to the kind of harder sciences and the infrastructure and construction industries, women are still sidelined in those industries.
You know, somehow, because also we are talking during the month of International Women's Month, and the theme for this year is breaking the bias, and you're talking about it, you know, in a practical manner, on the support that we need from a very, very young age, that, you know, we've been celebrating International Women's Day and International Women's Month for more than 100 years. But what the likes of Rosa Luxemburg tried to talk about, you know, 100 years ago, we're still dealing with it in 2022. You know, how can we move forward, you know, as we come into actually wrapping up our conversation? How can we move forward? What do we need as a country? And, you know, what do you need as a sector, because you are in the STEM sector? And yeah, you know, as I was saying to you earlier on, it's actually, as I was saying to you, that it's actually very nice to see that two women, when you're looking for citations or you're looking for you know, literature on the blue economy, actually you're going to find two women, two professors who actually have done so much body of work and different body of work. Your work starts even before 2015 on this topic alone, and this is beyond all the other work that you have done. You know, how can we move forward, and how can we bring more women into this conversation, or younger women, or, you know, young girls, and actually create opportunities and jobs for our ailing economy?
You know, like you say, we've been struggling with these issues of gender inequality for decades, if not centuries. And I think that we just have to start supporting one another as women. So, I mean, my own experiences as a professional woman is often that, so we're struggling this kind of male bias, right? but at the same time, we feel as if we're alone in the struggle, and we're not standing beside our sisters in the struggle. So if you are, fighting alone, you're not going to win. If you're fighting together, there's more of a possibility of succeeding in breaking this bias. And I'm not being anti-male in this regard. I'm just saying that women tend not to support one another enough. And I think that we need to make sure that we address those kinds of things going forward. And we need to, get men on board. And we can't afford a backlash against the women's empowerment movement. So men need to understand that this isn't anti-men. It's about women wanting a place at the table. And having the same amount of food to eat as everybody else. So it's really about more of a sense of sisterhood, so that we can achieve more together than we do on our own. And so that's the one thing. The other thing is to try and convince men. I don't know, we always have to go back to that, but often it's said that we also need to bring men around to understanding that women have equal value in the workplace, in life, in the family, and that it will benefit everybody if women are treated as equals. I think it was Nicholas Kristof, the American journalist, and his wife wrote a book called Women Hold Up Half the Sky. So, 50% of the world's population, 51% of the world's population is women, more than 50% in South Africa. If we empower women, we're going to grow the economy. There's no doubt about it. If we leave women out, we're not going to grow in any way.
I've actually not read that book, but I'm going through the name to say women hold half of the sky. And I really love that. I don't know why I'm leaning so much towards it. But Prof, I know that you've had a hectic day and you've had a hectic schedule, and I would like to thank you for actually having this conversation with us. I've got so many more questions in my head that I would like to structure and actually go and do more research, especially on how can we create energy. And we will invite you again to have this conversation. And for those who know or may not know, you actually helped me actually get one of my first articles to actually be, you co-authored something with me, which was actually published, properly published, and made a contribution to actually what we believe could actually empower women better, especially with land. And it was land then, when we were talking about land rights and land ownership. Now we're talking about women and the blue economy, which would be phenomenal to actually expand the conversation and actually have practical projects that we could say that maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and say that in 2022 we had this conversation and we're looking back at it and we have created at least 500,000 jobs, which is possible if we actually consolidate our ideas. And from what you have said, and when I look at even how you look at, if you're at the the beach in Kenya and Mombasa, where you'd see more women actually fishing, but then they could actually expand beyond fishing, that there is something that we could actually look at and look and say that we are going to create these jobs and we will create a blue fund as a country and move forward to actually overcoming the what has happened, the devastation of unemployment in our country. And with those few words, I'd like to really thank you for making time for us. And I will continue sharing some of the literature that you have published, so that actually more people get exposed to this conversation, then they could actually bring in more conversations as we go along. And thank you very much for this.
Thanks a lot, Karabo. It was lovely speaking to you again.
Okay, thank you very much. I am now trying to end the broadcast. Okay.